Right, so you just need to tap "Got it" on your screen to stay in the meeting, accept the recording. Okay, so this is sort of an overview of lesson planning without focusing too much on the expectations of Harlow College. We're just trying to kind of keep it as generic as possible, but then we can have a discussion about lesson planning and what specific requirements Harlow College perhaps has that other organisations wouldn't have, and perhaps even kind of the things that would be expected in a trainer's lesson plan in the commercial world versus what might be expected in further education where government funding is required. So why do we do it? I thought that's a good point to start off with. Perhaps why on earth do we bother with lesson planning? So hopefully there's a reasonable list of arguments as to why we should plan a lesson. And I'm talking about planning a lesson more than I'm talking about writing down a lesson plan. So this is, why should we plan a lesson? And I thought the top thing really, you're walking into a room potentially with lots of people in it, a workshop situation, a laboratory, an art studio, a gallery, a performance area, going online, and you're going to be working with a group of people for potentially several hours. And so one of the things, hopefully, that planning a lesson should do for you is it should give you confidence about the fact you know what you're doing for the next few hours with this group. And I think if you've got confidence when you walk into a room or when you open a lesson, then almost immediately you're starting to give your learners confidence as well. I think it's, learners can very soon pick up on a teacher that really doesn't know where the lesson's going or hasn't planned the lesson. And I think all of us at some stage, if you haven't, I'm sure you will be at some stage, you walk in to work in the morning, maybe you've got a non-teaching day, you've got a prep day, or perhaps, you've got a group that you're going to teach. And suddenly your manager says, "Oh, so-and-so's called in sick. I need you to go in and work with that group," a group that you've not met before, a group that you don't know, and possibly a subject that you've got no idea about. And that's a very uncomfortable position to be in. It's it really gets the old adrenaline racing, and it's a lack of that we want. We want an absence of that situation in the normal course of events. So that's the core reason probably why we plan lessons, is to give ourselves confidence that we know what we're going to be doing. And also then to convey that confidence in our behavior and our mannerisms to our learners, that this lesson didn't just fall into place, it was actually planned and there is a direction to it, and everybody knows that they feel they know where it's going. So confidence is probably the top reason of why we should plan a lesson. Thinking about what needs to go in it, the content of the lesson. And in most cases, we're probably going to need to refer to an awarding organisation, or at least some kind of standards in some way, shape or form in terms of what the content needs to be. So it's dictated to us very often. We need to, if they're working towards a qualification or an examination, we need to make sure the content is relevant to what it is that they need to learn, or if they're training to do a job of work, or if they're training to for a specific goal, then it needs to relate to that. So the content needs to be appropriate to what the learner's needs are. What resources we're going to be using so that we can plan in advance to make sure that they work. If it's online, do we know how to share screen? Will the sound work? Or if it's in the class, does the video work? Can we use the video properly? Just checking that they've got enough resources. If it's physical things, if we're doing carpentry and joinery, have we got all the tools? Have we got enough for each learner? Have we got a suitable amount of materials and resources? Do we need the technician, if we're lucky enough to have a technician? Do we need the technician to prepare anything for us? So it gets us thinking about the resources that we need and we'll use for the session. What order are we going to present these in? So thinking about the logic, and we might want to sort of bring in some educational theory in terms of the sequence. Do we go from a small picture to a big picture? Do we go from the large picture, the overall, down to the minutiae, the small, the detail? Do we start with the big stuff and work down to the smaller stuff? What sequence are we going to present this in so that it makes sense to the learner? We start with the easy bits and work towards the more challenging parts. We start with some examples. Are we going to start with some concepts and then work to the detail? Where do we come from that? Do we start with a bit of history? How are we sort of most likely going to engage the learner in this lesson? So thinking about the sequence of events for our lesson, what order are things going to come in? What methods are we going to use? What activities we want the learners to do? So thinking about what are the best ways to communicate these, what will most engage the learner, what will be most interesting, what is most likely to be effective. Thinking about the need for variety as well. So we're not doing any one thing for too long, and perhaps allowing the learners to disengage from the session. Excuse me. One of the critical things that really inspectors and observers will want to see in terms of a written lesson plan is, how was this lesson planned to meet the needs of the individuals in this group? Always assuming, of course, we're speaking about a situation where you know who you're going to be teaching and you've got some background information. So as you go through the year, if you're working with learners over a long period of time, we'd anticipate that those the knowledge of the learner's needs gets better and better and better as we get to know them more. Perhaps at the beginning, the first lessons, we might not know that much. If we're covering for somebody, or if it's just a one-off event and people we've never met before, that can be a bit more challenging. We can only base that on our experience. But very often we've got quite some considerable detail in advance of meeting our students, because they've been interviewed and they've got potentially predicted results, maybe actual results, maybe statements from schools, and maybe some kind of initial assessments that they've gone through. If we've been with them for some time now, we might know a lot more about the needs. And so the lesson plan needs to really reflect how has this particular lesson been customized and tailored to suit and adapt the needs of this particular group and any particular individual in there. We need to build in some kind of flexibility, because things will always go wrong. Potentially things won't happen quite as we wanted them to, especially if technology is involved, or if there are practicals involved, and things are bound to go wrong at some stage or other. So we need flexibility for that. There'll be unexpected events where learners get through things far quicker than we expected them to, or perhaps they already know it, or they might have covered it already with another teacher with another subject. More often than not, they struggle with it more than we expected them to. So things take a lot longer than we'd anticipated. So the lesson plan needs to have a degree of flexibility in there. So if we run out of materials, if we get through it quicker, we've got something else that will keep the learners engaged, that is relevant towards this program of study. But equally well, if things do take a lot longer, we can flex and fit that into our plan as well. We need to demonstrate to the learner links to previous learning and links forward to how they can use this in the future as well. So thinking about topics that we've already covered, thinking about some educational theory. Constructivism is a well-known educational theory. How we construct learning, we sort of build on foundations brick by brick as we build up. So we link back to what they've already done. How does this connect with previous learning? And that's actually one of the walkthrough criteria that we have here at Harlow College. Has the teacher mentioned connections to previous learning? And I'm going to take you through the walkthrough criteria as well. So I think it might be of any interest. If you are teaching, then it's what you'll be assessed against in terms of your walkthrough. So how does this connect with other topics that we're studying? How does it connect with previous learning? How does it demonstrate to the student that we're building and growing on our knowledge base? Thinking about that flexibility we mentioned a bit earlier, timing, of course, is one of the critical reasons why we plan. How much are we going to get into this lesson? How long is each session going to take? Thinking about those methods, are we ensuring that we've got a good variety of methods within the timing that we've allowed for? Have we allowed for assessment? Have we allowed for time for the learner to reflect and record what learning they've made, and possibly record any things that they haven't understood to take away as something as an additional study, or to bring up at a future lesson? And of course, we need to build into a lesson that we're going to make checks that learning has actually taken place, or to give it its formal name, assessment. And probably that's going to take the form of a formative assessment, checks that they're making progress in the right direction, and summative assessment, which then leads towards some kind of qualification. So I think that's the reasons, all the reasons I could think of as to why we plan a lesson. Anything that I've missed there, anybody?
Other than that, you're going to be asked to prove it by Ofsted or in college, that they're going to want to see that as marking off for your criteria.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
So I guess because you have to, if somebody checks up.
Indeed, yes. Yeah, I mean, traditionally, certainly the last 3 occasions when Ofsted have been in, they've checked that by observation rather than looking at the paperwork. An Ofsted inspector said to me, he said, "What I want to see is a planned lesson, not a lesson plan." And in fact, we trained all of our teaching staff. Last time Ofsted was in, just over 4 years ago, we trained all of our staff to present the Ofsted inspector with a lesson plan, a scheme of work, and a group profile the minute they walked in the door. And I was with either the lead inspector or one of the inspection team every day for the 4 days that they were out observing. And in every single case, they just said, "Oh, thank you very much," and laid it onto one side or pushed it to one side. I never once saw any inspector look at a lesson plan, a scheme of work, or a group profile. I suspect it's going to be similar this time. I think their inspection regime has changed again. They might want to look at schemes of work in terms of, why have we planned our units and sequenced our units like we have? I suspect they won't be at all interested in lesson plans.
Do you think that might have been different though? So if they hadn't been presented with the lesson plan, would they have said, "Where is your lesson plan"?
I don't think so, no. They were very fixated on just observing. They just wanted to sit and watch. Sometimes some of them liked speaking to the learners. If it didn't interrupt the lesson, there were a couple of lessons that we went into where the teacher, or where I should say the students, were just working quietly, either independently or in small groups. And the teacher was doing something else in the room, or they might have been working their way around the groups, supporting the groups. And the inspectors quite liked that, because then they would go and sit at a table with a group of learners and just ask them questions. That happened on, I think, about 3 occasions. But where the teacher was delivering, was doing something, they just wanted to sit and look at what was happening. They didn't seem the least bit interested in the lesson plan at all. I can remember a long time ago, an Ofsted inspector said, that if they looked at a good lesson, or they were seeing a good lesson, then they weren't interested in a lesson plan. If they were observing and the lesson was really awful, then they'd say, "Well, I want to see the lesson plan now, because I want to see why this has gone so badly wrong." But certainly my experience from the last 2 Ofsted inspections was that they are not in the least bit interested in written assessment, in written lesson plans at all. I suppose that they want to see what actually happens rather than what we said was going to happen. Harlow College, when we do our observations, we are very interested in lesson plans, and I can explain kind of why that is, really. But I'll go on to there's a couple more slides I've got on sort of why we write it down. But yeah, anything else that sort of might be missing off of there? Okay. So why do we need to write it down? Okay, we've established the reasons for having a planned lesson. So why do we need to commit it to paper on a lesson plan? So here again, off the top of my head, these are the reasons that I could think of. Perhaps, we need something to follow during the lesson. It needn't necessarily be a separate document. It could be that our PowerPoint presentation, our Nearpod, our Prezi, our activity that we've got planned is the lesson plan. So, by following our PowerPoint presentation, our Nearpod, or whatever it is that we've designed for the lesson, we are following a lesson plan. So it may be that we needn't have it as a separate document because it will automatically flow through. But if it's not written down, then in some way, shape or form, or created in some way, shape or form, how do we know what we're supposed to be doing at any one moment in time during the lesson if we haven't documented it or have it created in some kind of way? To use it again, that's another good reason for writing it down. Mostly, we find ourselves in a year's time or a few months' time that we're teaching that thing again. So having spent a little bit of time creating it, I think, okay, I've got that as a lesson plan. I can use that again, even if that just mean a PowerPoint presentation. At the end of the lesson, we can, I think all of the Harlow College templates do have a little box on them for you to record, how the lesson went and whether there's any opportunities to change it for the better. So you can think, oh, well, that went well, that didn't go so well. I can make a few notes on there for next time, allow longer for that. Don't bother with that, leave that bit out, add a little bit in there. For colleagues, they can be extremely useful. If we can't get into work for any particular reason, then we need somebody to cover our lesson for us. Then a sort of well-documented lesson plan can support a colleague in going in and taking a lesson on our behalf. To plan the next lesson, so when we come to sit down, okay, what have we got to do with that group this week? Or what did I do last week? And it might be that you look at a lesson plan to say, okay, well, we finished all of that and did a little bit of that. So this is the point I need to start from. I need to review this, I need to review that. And then we'll start at this point here. So having a lesson plan from the previous one helps us to plan the next one. And then lastly, of course, if you're being observed, then you absolutely 100% do need a lesson plan. So you might be observed for a probationary. If you're a new member of staff, you'll be observed for, I think, 2-3 times as a probationary. You will also be observed for a thing called a walkthrough, which is part of our internal quality assurance system. And you'll also be observed for a power of 3 group, which is a staff development practice. And for all of those things, it's expected that you will have a written lesson plan. One of the things that a lot of people don't seem to know about writing down a lesson plan is that Harlow College does not expect you to have a written lesson plan for every lesson. We know that documenting a full lesson plan for every single lesson is unrealistic. It's extremely time consuming. So we do not expect teachers to have a lesson plan for every lesson. We do expect them to plan the lessons, but we don't expect them to have a written down lesson plan. We provide 2 different templates for it, quite a linear formal style of template and a more creative what's called a 5-minute lesson plan. I don't know why, because realistically you're never going to complete it in 5 minutes, but it is a different format. It's a bit more creative than the linear one. However, Harlow College do not require staff to use either one of those 2 templates. It is highly recommended because they include everything that we expect, but you can use your own one if you require. I've done a couple of observations quite recently where people have been using lesson plans. I don't know where they got them from, but they were absolutely awful. They really didn't include even half of the things that Harlow College expect to see in a lesson. So it's good advice to use our own lesson plans, because then there's a box for everything on there. And if you've got some glaringly empty boxes on your lesson plan, then you know you've missed something out. So there we go. Why do we write it down? Any thoughts, queries, questions?
Yeah, sorry,
Okay.
Gary, you
Yeah.
were saying that you're not expected to do one for every lesson, but is there like
No.
a minimum? Is there like you have to do, I don't know how, if you're teaching 5 days a week, do you have to have like at least 1 or 2? Do you know what I mean? But there's
No, none at all. No, you might not have
Mm.
any. You might not have any. I think, you know, with lesson plans, there, for me anyway, and I think for a lot of teachers, there's something you build up over the years. So, you know, you gradually, when you've got time, you write one. When you haven't, you don't. And you build up a collection. Eventually, you know, in an ideal world, you get to a position where you've got a nice collection of lesson plans for a subject. The biggest challenge and the disheartening part of teaching is, you know, you create resources and materials for a subject, for a unit, for a particular class or course, and then come next year, your manager gives you a different class, a different unit, a different subject, or the awarding organization completely changes the syllabus, and nothing that you use from last year is of any use to you, and you have to start all over again. That you know, tends to be the position I've worked in. I mean, I'm going to show you one of my lesson plans that I used quite recently for my walkthrough. It's the lesson plan that I submitted when I was observed, and you'll see that the lesson plan itself, the document, is over 20 years old. But I rather than, you know, I don't have the time to generate a new one from scratch, so I just keep updating my old ones. So a lot of my lesson plans are on very old templates, but where I know things are missing, I just keep adding to them to make sure that I don't leave anything off. But no, really, I think the only time I would say you need a separate and documented lesson plan is when you're going to be observed. I would say it's essential. It would be. Do
you find if somebody's like starting a role as a teacher though, so if they're going in, say for like example, if I was going from LSP into a teaching role, would it be more beneficial for me to actually start doing them just so I get into like a routine of what to do?
Yeah, when I did my lesson, when I did my teacher training, you had to write, I think, a certain number of lesson plans every single week, and they were submitted into your teaching portfolio. That's not a requirement for the teacher training program anymore, not for level 4 or for level 5. But the idea was it got you into the discipline of what you need to consider when you were planning a lesson. And so you get to a stage where it becomes automatic, it becomes habit as to what you need to do in order to plan a lesson, and therefore you don't need to do it formally because mentally you just know it's there. You know, it's a bit like learning to drive a car sort of thing. There's things you forget at the beginning, and then gradually the more you do it, it becomes sort of a habit and it becomes all automatic to you. So I think it is, I do still believe, you know, when you're starting out on teaching, it's a really good habit to start writing lesson plans for as many lessons as you can. Depends what your contracted hours are for. You know, if they throw you in at the deep end, you find yourself teaching 24, 26 hours a week. You know, you're gonna be flat out developing materials, let alone writing a lesson plan. Yeah. Caroline.
Well, I was going to answer Carolyn. I've done exactly that. I'm a former LSA, now teacher, and I was thrown in at the deep end. So it's why I've come to this lesson tonight, because I do struggle with, not with lesson planning, but with getting the formal end of the paperwork done for lesson planning. So I know what I'm going to do, but it doesn't fit in with any of the sort of the paperwork. I actually contacted Gary today because the 5-minute lesson plan for Harlow College the template has changed for this year. And I said, I don't understand what this box actually means now. This is what I used to put in the box. How does that go in now? So, and I've very much found that it's something I just haven't got time for. I'm trying to sort of do them as often as I can, as Gary said, just to kind of get the mindset right and to make sure that I am covering everything. But yeah, it certainly doesn't take 5 minutes to write a 5-minute lesson. and I've tried to do it and sort of save it as a template, because some things don't change for me. So for example, the links to my students' group profile, so in there, you know, I've got something that's there that I know what each of the needs of my students are, so therefore I can check that and think about that when I'm planning other things. So but yeah, it's something I struggle with.
That's just interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I very rarely write a lesson plan. I don't have the time. You know, with prep and marking, it's you know, you're flat out preparing your lessons and doing marking. So, you know, getting the time to write a separate lesson plan is a luxury, really. What I do try to do when possible is, you know, I'll fill in the basics and think, okay, well, next time round I'll add a little bit more, and the next time round I'll add a little bit more.
Build upon, haven't you?
It'll gradually build up. That's right. Yeah, but sitting there and writing out a full-blown lesson plan, I would only ever do that when I'm being observed.
Right.
Because it's massively
it's not going to
time-consuming.
happen.
No, that's right. No. You know, and all that the words of that Ofsted inspector just ring in my ears. You know, what I want to see is a planned lesson, not a lesson plan. Yeah. Okay, I've got one more slide I'll share with you. Okay, so we've talked about, let's just go back one, just remind ourselves. We've talked about why should we plan a lesson? It's to give ourselves confidence, to make sure we've got the content right, to think about what resources we need to get together, the sequence and order that we're going to put things in that will be most beneficial for the learners, to make it logical so that they're picking the material up, what methods and approaches are we going to use, what activities will be in there. Thinking about adapting the lesson content in order to meet the needs of the group that we're working with. Give themselves some flexibility, because we know things will, you know, it is only a plan. When we plan to make a long car journey or even a train journey, there'll be closures and diversions and things that we hadn't accounted for. So we need to be flexible with it. It needs to link backwards and forwards to what the learner has learned in the past and what the learner will be learning in the future. To have some idea of how long each part's going to take, and that we've got some variety of activities. And we need to plan in there how we're going to do formative and summative assessment. So that's why we do a lesson plan. These are the reasons why we write it down. Now, if you are working in further education and the course that you're teaching on is being funded by central government office, then these are all of the additional things that it would be expected you need to build into a lesson plan. Awarding organisations would expect these, Ofsted would expect these, the Learning and Skills Funding Agency, who provide all of our money for mainstream programmes, would expect these, and Essex County Council, who fund our supported studies provision, would expect these, and the Job Centre Plus, who fund a lot of our adult provision, would expect all of these things to be embedded. It would be written down somewhere in a contract that they would expect all of these things. So how are we ensuring equality in our lessons and promoting equality? So thinking about access to learning, how are we ensuring that all of our students have got equality of access to this learning activity? Knowing our group, knowing who's in it, what have we done to adapt this lesson to make sure that everybody's included? We've talked a lot, haven't we, about inclusion and how to build inclusion into our lessons, thinking about all of the learners that are in our group, and that dreaded example that I keep dredging up, that I've been using for the last 3 years now, of when a teacher asked a group to make a note or write down as an activity, write down all of the signs that they noticed last time they were in an airport, and then realized more than half of his group were excluded from that activity because they'd never been in an airport. So a classic example of where a teacher's failed to build equality into a lesson. We live in a very diverse culture in this country. We value that. We recognise its contribution to culture, the country, society, and the economy. We encourage and promote it. And so we need somewhere in our lesson to think about how we are promoting the value of diversity to our learners, young people in particular, but to all adults, and within that, challenging incorrect thinking and inappropriate views and values. So we need to demonstrate how we are doing that. British values, anything that's government funded, you're required to build in British values to it. Differentiation is possibly covered with equality. So differentiation means essentially how you've made some things, scaffolding is a popular word that we use now. So how you've taken a task and provided a little bit of additional support in order for some students who are less academically able, or maybe if it's a physical activity, they don't have the manual dexterity skills that others do. They don't have perhaps the level of experience. Let's say if we're doing drama, art, dance, then perhaps some students have really put in the hours and the dedication to performing, whereas perhaps others haven't. So how do we differentiate the lesson to make it equally accessible for some learners who are less able, but equally well, those extremely able learners that we have in our group, how are we also presenting them with an appropriate level of challenge so that they're not bored because it's too easy for them, that we're providing a suitable level of challenge for everybody within the group, and that kind of, it connects quite strongly with equality as well. It's how we're adapting the lesson to meet the needs of the learners that are within the group. Again, if it's funded by central government office, we are required to keep teaching English and maths all of the time. So all of our lessons, even our adult courses, it's a requirement that we embed English and maths. And there's a particular way that Harlow College have decided that they're going to do that now, and I'll demonstrate that on a lesson plan. And lastly, employability skills. This is another thing. It's a requirement, central government office, that how are we getting young people and adults ready to go in the workplace? How are we developing their employability skills? It's been the complaint of employers for as long as I can remember, that with young people in particular, what are you doing with these young people? They're not ready to work. What have you done with them for the last 2 years? And so we need to build employability skills in there as well. I've added sustainability. It's not a requirement yet, but I suspect very soon it will be. The green agenda, it's coming up in everything now. So I suspect that will become something that's added to the very long list of things that, in addition to teaching our subject, we have to build all of these things in as well. For me personally, I think when I very first started teaching almost 40 years ago, a teacher would do these things quite naturally. If they were, somebody of high standards and morals, these would be the sort of things that you would just do because they're the right thing to do. But now education is all about money and no longer about education. So not only do we have to do the right thing, we have to document that we've done the right thing. Everything has to be proved. So in a lesson plan, a written lesson plan, all of these things would need to be demonstrated in some way, shape or form as to how you were achieving them. I'm going to take you through a lesson plan now, and we can sort of try and pick out why it looks like it does and where all those things are. But does that raise any queries or questions?
My question is, sometimes I think once we've covered all of that, how on earth do you cover the content of what you're actually trying to teach?
I know, yeah.
You know, you're sort of going,
Yeah.
I've done this and I've done this and I've done this and I've done this and I've done this.
Yeah,
Now we're
yeah.
halfway through the lesson. This is what you need to know for today.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's you know, this list of extensions seems to, you know, none of those, when I first started teaching, none of those things that you see on the screen there were in place. All you had to do is to teach your subject. And gradually it's just been added to and added to and added to. Yeah, the secret is to try and embed it, you know. So in engineering, you know, promotion of diversity in engineering, and I guess it does take me a bit longer. One of the classic ways that I might promote diversity is if I'm going to show them a video of somebody talking about their specialist subject, then I will try to find a woman rather than a man, because stereotypically engineers tend to be male. So I'm trying to break the mold by showing a video of a woman. And very often I'll go to universities in Arabic or Asian countries, India, Qatar, countries like that. Have got some excellent universities with some really good women who are really top of their field in engineering, excelling in engineering, to try to extend the thinking of some of my young lads in engineering. That it's because it's very, very rare. Most of our groups are all male. We have a small number of females in the groups, but they are very much in the minority. And you're just trying to break that mindset a little bit to show that, you know, to promote that diversity. So I never compromise on quality. So if I can't find a good quality video, then I will always go with, you know, something a bit old school. But I try and sort of build it in to the lesson rather than do it as something separate. Some teachers will choose to do it as something completely separate, and they'll say, oh, you know, today is Diwali, and today is this day, and today is that day, and it's a celebration of this, and that, you know, they'll pick out religious ceremonies in calendars and talk to the group about that. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't do that, I have to confess. I think it's just a diversion. You can do those in tutorials. It's quite a strong diversion from the subject, so I prefer not to do that, but I know some teachers do prefer to do that. You know, I'll pick on something that's in the news to discuss, but I'd say, you know, that for me that belongs in tutorials.
So in my case, I teach engineering. I'm Japanese and female.
Yeah,
so myself is kind of ticked off diversity.
Yeah, absolutely, it is, Kimmy. Yeah, you are an excellent role model for the subject, aren't you? Yeah, that's right. Just by being there.
So this kind of thing, do I have to put every lesson or in whole unit TikTok at least once or twice? Or
yeah, I think it's where it's appropriate, where it fits for me. I think, you know, without being cynical, if I'm being observed, it'll be in there. You know, I'll make sure it's in there. Otherwise, I do it where I feel it's appropriate, wherever I feel I can demonstrate some level of diversity in a lesson, then I will do it. But if it doesn't fit, you know, if they're in my workshop and they're soldering circuits together, that's, you know, then it would be something additional that I'd have to build in, and I'm not going to do that really, because it would be separate from the learning.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll walk you through a lesson plan from my from the last lesson where I was observed. You know, because I teach, I have to be observed at least once a year, the same way as everybody else does. And so I created a lesson plan from an old one, just brought it up to date a little bit. And I will share this with you. And if you want a copy of it, if you feel that would be valuable, then I'm happy to share that with you as well. So let's do a share screen on this. It's actually from this course. It's actually from the level 3. This was one level 3 group that I taught over the summer. So I think Joe took you through this particular unit. So it's unit 1, task D. So Joe took you through this unit when as you were doing this course, but during the summer I took a group through it through adult funding. And this is the lesson plan that I created for this, because obviously with a walkthrough you know when you're going to be observed. So it's at least you know the week, so you're writing lesson plans for every lesson that week. I think I only had this group, so I pretty much knew it was going to be this group. But this is what I put. Now this is a very, very old template. This template is a Harlow College template that's over 20 years old, but I've added all of the new bits into it as they've come along, rather than sort of start from scratch again, just through sort of time saving. So I've got the group at the top there, the date it was being delivered, how long it is, and the topic that it was about, creating a safe and supportive environment. What do I know about this group? Well, I've got a group profile, so my observer can look at that. But I had 4 students in there who had English as a second language, 2 of which were completely new to a teaching role. One was in a commercial training role at the hospital, and all of the others were completely new to teaching. Differentiation opportunities. So how can learners sort of bring their own experience into this? How can they access this learning regardless of their previous experience? This is one of the things that's perhaps a little bit more challenging on this course, because you get some people who've been teaching for years who come on this course, and some people have never ever taught before. So how do I get learners to all go into a little room together, into a breakout room, or do an activity when they've all got that different level of experience? So here, because this was sort of post microteach, I suggested that they draw on what their experience was from their own microteach in order to contribute. So that's kind of leveling the playing field out a little bit. But I don't know if you can remember, right back to week 1, one of the objectives for this course was to help teachers, new and developing teachers, develop their own style of teaching. It's very much, it's one of those things where everybody has their own style of delivery. There's no right, wrong way of doing it. It's growing your own personal approach to teaching, and incorporate their own personal values and philosophy. So we all have a sort of a love of a certain subject. We all have our own reasons for what brought us into teaching. So it was allowing students to bring those own personal values into the lesson. And for this particular activity, which was in breakout rooms, if they got stuck, I had created 3 separate little Nearpod lessons that they could dip into to access additional supporting materials. So that was my scaffolding, if you like. So that's how I'd created differentiation opportunities for that particular group. Please stop and ask if there's anything that doesn't make sense as we go through this. I've moved you all to another screen now, so just open your mic and give me a shout. If you raise a hand, it won't come up as being obvious on my screen. So how am I going to check that learnings took place? Well, formatively, there's going to be work that's completed by pairs during the session. So I'll see what's been produced and give them feedback on that. And summatively, of course, there's the assignments that will be completed. And there's a box there for post-lesson evaluation comments. So that would be at the end of the document on all of the new Harlow College templates now. That's the last box, but on this old one here, that's where it was. You can see I haven't filled it in. So what are my learning outcomes? I've broken them down into knowledge, skills, and behaviours for this. What am I expecting students to be able to do as a result of my lesson? So the K's are for knows, the S is for skills, and the B for behaviour. So I'm hoping that they will know a range of things that they can do in a classroom to create a safe and supportive and purposeful learning environment. They will know some of the theories that support and underpin the need to have a safe and supportive environment. So things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs and Glasser's theory. The skills that I want teachers to be able to develop is to be able to create a safe and supportive learning environment in their own classrooms and in their own training activities. And the behaviours that I want to see is in the breakout rooms that they collaborate effectively with their peers. So I'm developing behaviours now that are not anywhere on the criteria. These are not performance criteria that are listed. These are things that I think morally are important skills to have as a teacher, and it's kind of in employability skills, the ability to work with others. And the higher level thinking skills, the last one there, to be able to critically reflect and evaluate practices, values and beliefs. So sort of developing reflection skills, which are important for a teacher. So that's the employability skills there. So what happens if we finish all of this stuff sooner than expected? They're all going to be working in breakout rooms. So what if they finish before the time is up? So I'm going to be popping into the breakout rooms and checking what they do. You'll notice this is probably completely different to what Joe did because we all deliver in our own way. So I know Joe delivers this unit in a very different way to me. So extension activities, well, if everybody finishes, then I've got a little case study of a student that has quite extreme anxiety. And so then they can extend their learning to say, well, how would they create a safe and supportive environment for a learner that has anxiety, given that little case study that they're going to work through. So that's kind of my extension activity for any group that finishes ahead of time. Now we come on to the structure, and I don't know how big a screen you're working on, but you might be able to see down there that this lesson plan template is from 2002. So it's just over 20 years old, that template. Now I've just been sort of adding to it as things have gone by. So here's my timings down the first column. This is the timings I'm expected. This was a different. This course was delivered at a different time because it was adult ed. It started a bit later than your course, so it started at 5:30. And went through to 8:30.
So Gary, if you've put the time there that you've started it, but
yeah,
on say our ones, if I put in there like 5 minutes or whatever, because you don't know what time you're starting, that's fine, is it?
Yeah, it's however you want to use it. So I mean, you could put in that box how long the activity is going to last if you wanted to. I mean, I think it's, lesson plan comes down to whatever's most helpful for the teacher. So if that, looking at it at a glance, you'd want to see, how long is this going to take? And if you've got to then look at two boxes, it's okay, 5:30, oh, that's 10 minutes. If you want to put 10 minutes in that box, then yeah, it's what's helpful to the teacher. I think it's most important. So then in my next column, I've got what the content of that segment is going to be. It's going to be to review the microteach sessions and connect it. This is my link here now, you see, so we're linking. I'm linking back to previous learning. So I'm thinking about what's my observer going to want to see in my lesson plan. And I'm thinking about what's good practice as a teacher. Constructivism, we're building on existing learning. Everybody's delivered a microteach. So we can now think about, well, how, can we take the learning from that microteach and use it? Recycle it, we'll use it again. So I want everybody to think about their microteach. How did you create a safe and supportive learning environment in your microteach? What did you actually do? So what I'm going to do then in the next column, what does the teacher need to do? I want to review the microteach session. So I've created a Nearpod. That will be a collaboration board, and I'll get the students to give their feedback on responses. What do I want the students to do and show? I want to think about their previous learning from the microteach and respond to the question that's on the collaboration board. E and D is equality and diversity. E and M is English and maths. I also put employability in there as well. So equality, every learner will contribute. I've made it accessible through Nearpod. They don't have to speak if they don't want to. So they can just type and it'll appear on there. That gives the opportunity for 100% contribution. All learners will make a contribution. It links to employability because teachers need to create a safe and supportive environment. So it's connected to their job role. English as a second language, that is ESL. So I've got 4 students in this group whose English is a second language. So with Nearpod, in a collaboration board, you can open your mic and speak, and it records it as a voice note instead of a post-it note. So ESL learners, they've got the choice. So I'm just kind of, making that equality of access there and a little bit of differentiation. The resource that I'm going to use is a Nearpod lesson that's saved as Unit 1 Task D, and the actual slide is going to be a collaboration board. Does that all kind of make sense how this is hanging together? You begin to get a feel for how long it takes to write a lesson plan now, if you sort of include everything, if you're justifying it all. So as we move through the lesson, we've done that little activity, what makes a safe and supportive environments. So we're on to another activity. This is a matching activity that's in Nearpod. It's the next slide. There's diversity in there. I've promoted diversity through the matching activity. Every learner will participate. So that's the equality. And there's my resources. So that's kind of a little introduction to the lesson and a link back to previous learning. So I've done a review there. I've reviewed previous learning and I've connected it to today's topic. So I'm 15 minutes into this lesson now, and I'm going to introduce the 4 steps to success, which is a Harlow College thing. That's only Harlow College need to do that. So there we go, 4 steps to success. Just check everybody's happy that they understand that. And this is kind of a bit of retrieval practice, thinking about our previous learning. So just a reminder of what we're doing today and how that links back. And that's another Nearpod slide.
How do you know how long activities are likely to take? Because again, this is something that I struggle with, that, I might think that something will take 5 or 10 minutes and it actually takes considerably less or considerably more than I was expecting.
Yeah, that's how it goes. It's absolutely how it goes. It's that's kind of a best guess. It's your best guess. And only through experience and practice do you begin to get better and better at it. But ultimately, you still don't know. You still really never know. I know. So this whole lesson that I'm delivering now, I'd planned for that to last an hour, and you can see now it's 5:03. So we're now sort of over time because it's gone over what I'd expected it to, and it more often than not it lasts longer. It's kind of rarer for it to be quicker, but more often than not it lasts longer. It's only through experience, but ultimately you never really know, and that is something that nobody would ever assess you on, is your timings. Nobody would ever judge you on that. On a walkthrough, that is something that would not be considered. In fact, you would be not marked down, but it would go against you certainly if things were taking too long and you just speeded up, even though the students clearly weren't with you. If you started leaving the students behind, or if they were struggling and you moved on to the next topic because that's what was on your lesson plan, or you deliver a segment and you think, crikey, these students really don't get that, and I can see that this is supposed to build on what we did last week, and they obviously haven't understood anything that we did last week. Any observer from Ofsted or from the college would expect you to go back to the lesson from last week and deliver that, that bit again that they needed, and go completely off plan. You know, a lesson should be driven by learner needs, not by the plan.
So
So-
if some of your sections weren't completely linked to each other, would it be okay to say, I can see that this is difficult for you, we're going to revisit this next week and move on to the next part of this lesson? Could you do that, or would that not be okay?
You could do that as long as the next part didn't rely on the previous part.
Right, okay. Okay.
Yeah, equally well, it would be okay to say, right, okay, let's abandon this plan. We need to, you know, we need to go back to square one. Let's go back one square, and we'll go over what we did last week and see, you know, where things didn't work out, what we have got, what we haven't got, and where we need to go from what we covered last time.
Okay, thank you.
Gary, just a
Yeah.
quick based on the example you just gave, where you might have had a lesson that goes over, when you write the next lesson plan, I'm not sure on the frequency you would do it, but let's say it was a daily one, for example. So you done one for Monday, you got through Mondays, but then Tuesday's plan now, would it be as simple as just adding at the top of it that you're gonna finish off yesterday's lesson, and then you just put your plan for Tuesday? Is it as simple as that?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it would. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I always, you know, with most lessons, you have things that I would say, you know, essential to do, sort of kind of quite important to do, and nice to do. And so you think, okay, it's essential that I do that. It's essential to do that. You come to a section, you think, okay, we're way behind on time. This thing here is a nice to do. It's not essential. So I'm just going to drop this. I'm going to take this out. And this is where, you know, at the beginning I said, talking about having flexibility in your lesson plan. So I think, what can I afford to drop here as we go through this? Right, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. Very often you'll find it's activities that get dropped. You know, if you don't know, of course, you know what our lesson plans look like. But if you looked at Joe and I's lesson planning, you'll see we have very often a lot more activities in our lesson plans than we actually deliver. And that's because, you know, we need the flexibility in there to say, oh, okay, that went a bit quicker than I'd expected it to. We'll pop in an extra activity. Or I often mark ones with a star, you know, sometimes on a lesson plan. So I could drop that, I can drop that, I can drop that. So you're constantly keeping an eye on the time. Have a look at lesson plans. So, wow, we're way behind there. Right, I'm going to drop that. I'm going to drop that. That needs to stay in. We've got to cover that. And we could do that as a discussion, maybe rather than an activity. And perhaps I'll give that as a homework. So you're just constantly adjusting adjusting the rudder, if you like, according to how things are going. But yeah, Max, it's absolutely, you'd say, okay, you've got to think, I suppose, you know, we missed out a quarter of the lesson today because we couldn't get through it. Look at that. Do they need it? Is that essential? Do I have to cover that? Yeah, that is it's part of their assignment. They're going to have to do something on that. I've got to put it in. Or do you think, okay, well, it's in the indicative content, it's in the syllabus, but actually it's not part of their assignment, I'm not going to do it.
So then what you just said about the activities that normally take the sacrifice, is that why sometimes a teacher would give it to you as homework instead?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, lovely. Thanks for all the questions. Keep them coming. Appreciate all the questions. So how are we doing on our lesson plan here? So we've now got to 5:50. So they've got the questions about the criteria. Okay, yeah, you've noticed I do this quite a lot. I don't know whether Joe does the same, but I show you the criteria almost before we look at the learning, don't we? Very often the first thing I'll say, I'll give you all those numbers. You know, this is 531, 532, 534. And I'll say, look, here's all the criteria here. And have you got any questions? Because I know that's what you've got to meet. I think if you have for me, I think it's important that you understand the assessment criteria as well as the content of the lesson. I think that's another, it's a different way of looking at what we've got to learn. So I take you through the criteria. and I ask you if you've got any questions. And I kind of remind you that there's a link to employability here. As a teacher, if you're working with assessment criteria, one of the things that you need to be able to do is to read and interpret assessment criteria. It's probably one of the most challenging things a teacher has to do. So that links to employability. And also you see that I've put a note there. Why am I doing this? I've put explain that the role of a teacher when writing and marking assignments and preparing students for an assessment is to understand assessment criteria. So I'm making connections with what I'm teaching and the role that my students are going to be taking on as teachers. So it's links to employability. So I'm ticking a box there for my observer, and I'm making it obvious. I would not write that if I was putting my lesson plan, because this is where an observer, you need to be. Have you ever heard of those of you that can drive? Were you ever told? Stop that for a second. But were you ever told, you know, when you take your test, when you look in your rearview mirror, don't just glance up to look at it. Actually, turn your head to look in the rearview mirror so that your instructor can see that you're doing it. You know, so with a lesson plan, the observer, you know, wouldn't know, pick up on the subtle nuances of why is the teacher showing these students the assessment criteria. You know, you might say, well, that's something a teacher should do anyway, but I'm showing you because they're written in funny language, assessment criteria, and a big part of a teacher's role, very often, if you're delivering to a qualification, is the ability to read, interpret assessment criteria. So I'm linking there to employability skills. I don't think my observer is going to pick up on that. That's way too subtle. And I need my observer to know that I am linking my lesson to employability skills. So I write it on the lesson plan. Wouldn't do that if I wasn't being observed. I'm just laying down the path, making it clear to my observer where I'm being competent against the criteria.
So if in doubt, just state the obvious, really.
Yeah, absolutely. It might
Yeah.
be obvious to you, but, you know, because you know the subject, you know the students. You know, so a classic example is, you know, we're supposed to challenge students if they arrive late appropriately. You know, and I've known teachers where students just stroll in late, go and sit down, and the teacher doesn't speak to them. You know, and they'll get marked down on a walkthrough for that potentially. But it's not on the group profile or the lesson plan. Is, you know, that learner's a carer. They're caring for their sick mother. They often come in late. It's been agreed and recognized in advance, but if that's not recorded and on a lesson plan anywhere, so the teacher will say, well, you know, somebody just strolled in late and they never spoke to them. So it's just making sure that all the things that are going on are obvious to the observer, you know, particularly when you're being observed.
So that's something I'm going to, so I've got a couple of learners who have anxiety, and as a result, I don't question them in open class. So I would need to write that in my lesson plan then, that I am not questioning these learners because of their anxiety. So, I mean, I have got written in it that, like, they have anxiety, but I haven't made a statement to say that, therefore, I'm not going to question them.
No, that's right. Absolutely. That's a perfect example, Caroline. Yeah. So, I mean, personally, as an observer, I don't know Joe's thoughts on it, but as an observer, what I love to see, if a teacher gives me a lesson plan, I love to see it scribbled on, where the teacher's made last minute notes on it about how this lesson's going to go based on the students that are in it. You know, so X, Y, Z, so-and-so might be late, so-and-so it's got this, X, Y, Z is that. And it's just, you know, there's little scribbled notes that have been annotated on at the last minute that morning that really shows me this teacher knows their students and they've really thought about how they need to modify this lesson to meet their needs.
And if it's an observation situation, it's demonstrating they understand the observation process as well, actually.
Well, yeah, there's that too, yeah.
And there's when you were talking about revealing what those the assessment criteria are, it's about having that holistic understanding of what it is you're embarking on, isn't it? Seeing things in yeah, seeing things as a whole rather than little bits and pieces. And if you're sort of together and organised enough to be able to sort of update your lesson plan on the fly, that is usually a very, very good sign, actually, because you're responding to the thoughts that are coming into your head and you're doing something with them. And most people I speak to, and it may be the same for all of you, well, certainly for me, the benefit in lesson planning is the planning and the thinking and the organising of my thoughts. And as I'm doing it, I'm visualising myself in the classroom and my students, and sort of having almost having a dialogue with the students in my head as I'm putting that lesson plan together. But when it actually comes to the delivering the lesson plan is often it's not on my hand, you know. It's sometimes not even printed, you know, but it's certainly informing everything I'm doing. But yeah, from an observation point of view, and if it's useful in the session to make notes on it, I think it's a really good sign, actually, because it just shows you're alive to what's going on, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if I see a scribbled on lesson plan, then yeah, it initially think, oh yeah, it gives you a little bit of confidence. Here goes an insider trade trick there. I think it's Dr. Stephen Covey who said all things are created twice, you know, once in the mind or on paper, and then in reality. So, you know, you're going to build a house, you design it all on paper first, so it's created once. And then you take that plan and you build the house, so it's created a second time. I think, you know, a lesson plan is in your mind. Your imagination is taking you through that lesson, imagining what activities you're going to be doing, imagining how your learners, knowing them like you do, will be responding to your input and your content. And therefore, you know, how you need to drive the pace of the lesson, and who you need to watch out for, and who you need to provide additional support for, and who might work well with who else, and those kind of things. So things like, you know, don't put so-and-so with so-and-so in a group, and those kind of little things that scribbled onto a lesson plan is just, you know, does give you confidence. Yeah. I don't know how much further we want to go through this. We can go through this as much as you want. I'll see if I can pick out sort of most relevant parts of this lesson plan. Okay, yeah, we need to embed English, don't we? Now, here's the thing. This only applies to Harlow College, but Harlow College have adopted a certain way of embedding maths and English. There's a 3-step approach to it. If you want to be if you want to meet the criteria for embedding maths or English, you don't have to do both in every lesson, one or the other, but they want to see it when you're being observed. You have to take this 3-step approach. And the 3 steps are: step 1, you need to teach a little bit about whatever it is, the maths or the English. Step 2 is you now need to allow the students to practice what they've just been taught. And step 3 is then they should be applying it in the context of the subject that they're learning. So there's the 3 steps. So I decided that I was going to embed English in this particular lesson. One of the criteria that it comes up a lot is explain. We see that a lot in the criteria that you have to meet for this lesson. It's always saying explain this, explain that, explain the other. And it's not perhaps as obvious as what it sounds. Explains. People do struggle with explaining things, and sometimes, you know, it's not uncommon to get a referral for people because they haven't understood what it means to explain. So let's not you know, let's not assume everybody knows what explain means. Plus, I've got 4 people whose first language is not English in this group, so it's worth taking a little time to think, what does it mean to explain? So we do a little bit on the word explain. What is the interpretation of it? What does it mean to explain something? And so there was an activity first, a little collaboration board on Nearpod. Then I did a bit of teaching on it. And we looked at 2 examples of student work where they'd explained, where one had hit the criteria and one hadn't. And then to hit my diversity, we looked at what the word explain is in Arabic and Polish, which were from my 4 learners whose second language wasn't English. They were the 4 of them in total. The 2 languages that were covered were Arabic and Polish. So I looked up the words and I put the words on the screen, and I got those students to talk about what they felt explain meant in their language, and how to pronounce it and how it was spelt. And so that was kind of the promotion of diversity, that we were looking at the word explain in 2 other languages. So I'm valuing the diversity of the group here. I'm showing how I value that we've got different speakers and different cultures in a language, and how different cultures might interpret the word explain. So we're getting a better and deeper understanding of the word explain, so helping students to meet that criteria. So that's how I've embedded English in there. So then we did a bit on Maslow. That's a theory of the content. It was a small group activity. So now they're putting into practice what I've taught. So this is step 2 of my embedding English. And I need to indicate to my observer where all 3 steps are, because the observation only lasts 20 minutes. I don't know when they're coming into the lesson. So they might only see 1 out of the 3 steps, or they might not see any. They might sort of drop in between. So I've got to have it in my lesson plan how I've embedded English using the 3 steps that we advocate, because I want that to be met on my observation report. So I need to make sure it's detailed. So I've put teaching English here. So I'm really making this blatantly obvious to my observer. That's where I've taught English. This is where we're practicing English. And then I've got equality again, every learner to participate. And I've allowed them to use different types of media to present back. So they can use PowerPoint, Word, Prezi, whatever kind of media that they want to present back to the rest of the group. So a little bit of differentiation there. And again, options for students to be involved in the delivery of the presentation or not. So a little bit of differentiation there. So now we're starting work on the assignment here. This is applying English. So I've actually written what the 3 steps are on my lesson plan. Teach, practice, apply. So I'm being blatantly obvious to my observer where I've covered the 3 steps. So now the learners are working in pairs. They're starting on their assignment in breakout rooms. They're starting to write up Unit 1, Task D. Students can call for help from their room. So we've got a bit of scaffolding there. We've got British values coming in here. Where are those? Cover key aspects using slides. After contribution of the slide, link to the role of a teacher to promote British values. Refer to notes. And we've got a little quiz going on there in Nearpod. Working with their study buddy again. Talking about safeguarding and reporting. And then we end at 8:15. The lesson ended at 8:30. So I've planned to end at 8:15. So that's given me 15 minutes buffer time if things overrun or go too short. Plus I've allowed that sort of time for reflection there as well. So there we go. And I was lucky enough to have my observer marked everything down as being met on that. And that wasn't because she saw everything. It was because what she didn't see was covered on my lesson plan.
I miss a stretch and challenge in there, Gary.
Well, the extension activity was really the challenge, so that you know, if there was if they'd finished that exercise early in their breakout rooms, I made them all aware, and I kept dipping into the breakout rooms to see where they were. So if anybody had finished, I'd got that extension activity to you know, to go in there as a stretch and challenge. Yeah.
So an extension does count as a
Yeah, an
stretch.
extension would do that. Yeah, yeah. The other thing I was going to show you was what the document looks like from an observer's point of view. If from a walkthrough, what criteria we're looking for and what boxes we have to tick. If you'd like me to share that, I can take you through that as well, if that's valuable. Yeah, is that something you want to do? Do you want to spend time looking at that?
Me personally, I'm kind of zoning out to this part now.
Yeah, yeah, it's very Harlow College focused, this, isn't it, Max? Yeah, yeah.
I'm more concerned about all the assessment stuff that I know I need to do.
Yeah, sure, sure.
But
Yeah.
if the majority
Yeah.
still wants to go over it, I don't mind, innit? I don't mind.
No, I mean, I think perhaps what we can do is if we take a break at this point, it's 5:25. If we take 15 just to recover from me talking for an hour and a half, then then we can come back, and if we can, I can go through that for those who want it, and then Joe, if you want to go with take Max off,
Yeah, sure.
yeah, then you can do a one-to-one on the assignments. Does that work
Yeah.
for everybody? Yeah.
What time we going to do that?
Well, it's up to you whether you want to break now or whether you want to do it now.
I'm easy, whatever is best for Max.
If everyone's taking a break, I'll take it with the group, and then
Yep.
we'll jump back on. I'll just
Okay,
do a breakout room from there.
let's just